In this section, we're going to cover the concept of geolocation using Parse. So geolocation is just the ability to query your data, your database, but really ask questions of your data based on its location in the world, not based on other attributes like, is it closed or is it claimed, but just based on its physical location in the world. So some of the kinds of questions, kinds of geolocation style questions you can ask of your database, of your Parse database, is perhaps show me all coffee shops in order of distance from a particular location, or perhaps show me all coffee shops within this rectangular space in the world where you specify the coordinates of this rectangle. Now, to demonstrate this feature in Parse, when we set up the database in our sample dataset, we created a class or a set of objects for a class called place. Now, if you look at this data in the dashboard, this is actually pretty much the raw data you'd get from calling the Yelp API, YELP API. So Yelp is an online review platform, which has a nice API which you can use just to extract some interesting data. So the data I got from the Yelp API was a bunch of coffee shops near me in East London. So in your database, you should have about 40 coffee shops, each of them with these columns. So is closed, is claimed, review count, snippet, menu date updated. This is just the standard data I got from the Yelp API. We've got a name, which is we're going to use a lot. And the other bit we're going to use, if you scroll to the right, is something called the geo point. If I double click here, you see it's got two values, what's called a latitude and a longitude. So every point on the planet Earth can be located via two numbers, the latitude and the longitude. Okay, latitude, longitude, latitude, longitude. And so when defining a coffee shop, we give it what's called a geo point, and the geo point has a latitude and a longitude. To show you how we actually created this, let's go back into the script which we used to bootstrap our database. So in here we had a function called create places. Now the places data comes from a JSON file which I've put on the internet. It loads the JSON file, goes to each of the items in the JSON that's returned, and if the item has a location, I get the latitude from the location, I get the longitude from the location, and I do something. I create something called a parse geo point, okay, where I pass in the latitude and the longitude, and I create a single item which defines this kind of XY coordinate of this location in the world. Now let's just have a quick look at the API documentation. So if you go to parse geo point, you can see there's quite a few different ways of defining a geo point. So you can define it by passing in another geo point, latitude and longitude just as values, as an array. I like to be very explicit when specifying it. It's typical to have the latitude and longitude, but sometimes people can get confused. So I find it a lot better just to pass in an object which specifically states this is the latitude and specifically states this is the longitude. So that's why I prefer that method. And you can see it's also got a couple of other options. Again, just have a read through. So it's got kilometers to, miles to, and radians to. So kilometers to a point would return you the number of kilometers from the current geo point to the point that you pass into the kilometers to function. And again, the miles to one does that as well. And radians is just another way of defining a distance. So yeah, just have another look through this API. It's quite a small API really. But as I say, always recommend just have a quick scan through the API just so you get just so you can get an idea of what's involved. But anyway, back to our code. Okay, so then I create the geo point. I then just set it on the item, and then when I save the place, I pass in the data I want to save, and one of them is the geo, which is the geo point, and then that just saves it to the database. And then we have a column type of geo point, which lets us then do geolocation style queries in our data. Now, an important thing to note is one class each class can only have one column, one field, which has a geopoint. You cannot have two columns in this class with a geopoint. You can only have one column in a class which has a geopoint. Just something to be aware of. Okay, if you're planning at some future point to have another column, you won't be able to do that. So just bear that in mind. Okay, so that's what we're going to use in this section to play around with. We're going to use this place class, and we should already have bootstrapped it with some coffee shop information, with some coffee shops specifically in East London. So that's how you set up geopoints, but really what's the point in setting up a geopoint unless you can really ask your database questions based around location. So really this is a topic about querying, and specifically how to do querying based on locations. So to describe this, I'm going to go through another JS bin. So I've created one here before. So again, initialize parse. I'm going to use the place class, and I'm going to use a location to play around with. So I create a geopoint with this specific location. Now this specific location is actually me right now in East London. So that's my actual location right now. And if you want to play around with this data, I recommend you use this location as well, because, well, that coffee shop data is just coffee shops near me right now. And then underneath there on line 7, I start a query on the place. I'm not doing anything. I'm not restricting this query at all. I just want to get all of the results. And all I'm doing afterwards is I'm just printing out the name of the coffee shop. So let's just run this to make sure it works. There you go. All this does is it gets all the coffee shops from the places database and just prints them out on the screen in no particular order. Now let's say I want to ask the question, get me the closest 10 coffee shops to this user. So what we can do q.near. I'm going to say which field I want to compare against. Our geolocation field is the geo field. And I'm going to say which point do I want to be near to. So, or what do I want to compare against? I'm going to say user's location, which is this one. And let's say I want to return just the closest 10. There we go. So we limit it to 10. So what near is saying is basically, look, just all of the results by distance to this location. So order all of the results by distance to this location. So whichever location is the closest to this user's location, that will be number 1. The second will be the one that's slightly further away. The third will be slightly further away. So it's going to, further down the list, it's going to be more and more distance from the user's location. And because we want the closest 10, we're just going to limit it to the first 10. Okay, so now let's clear this and run it again. Okay, so I think it's worked. It's returned 10 results. I don't really know if it's right. I don't really know the distance from the user, so we can't really tell. So how do we actually add to this console log the actual distance that this place has to the current user? Okay. Now, if you remember going back to the API, we have this miles to function. So we can use that to get the distance from a particular coffee shop to a particular point. And that point being the user's current location. So let's do that. So let's do var distance is equal to, okay, let's do this. Var place is equal to places I. So I can do distance place dot get. We want to get the geo point. So now we have the geo point. We want to call miles to user's location. So the distance is going to return, should say miles. So the distance is now going to be the number of miles between the location of the coffee shop and the user's current location. And let's just print that out here. Just to make things consistent, let's just type place there. Okay, that's clear, hit run. Let's give it some space. So here you go. So you can see 0.3 miles, 1.1 mile, 1.3 miles, all the way down to 2.8 miles. So you can see it's actually returning the coffee shops that are closest to me to the coffee shops that are furthest away. So that's kind of like a common use case if you are perhaps using geolocation in some sort of application where you typically want to return results closest to the current user. Okay, so that returns all coffee shops in order of some sort of distance parameter. Let's say we, instead of wanting to ask this question, we want to ask a different question, perhaps return all the coffee shops within a 5-mile radius of me right now. So to answer this question, I'm just going to copy and paste the code onto a different line. Here we go. Okay. And instead of doing a q.near, I want to do a q within miles. And there's also a within kilometers function as well. You again provide the field on the class that the geo point is on, and it's the geo field. You then provide the location which you want to compare against, the central location. And then you provide the number of miles that you want to measure from. So what this is going to do is going to return all coffee shops within 5 miles of the user's location. That's what within miles does. Actually, I spelled that wrong. It's W without the H. I'm not going to limit it to any results. And again, just like before, you can get the distance using the miles to function just here. So now, if I clear and hit run, there you go. So it's returning, let's just expand this out. So it's returning quite a few more results now. And you can see it's still ordered by distance. Okay. But at the bottom, it kind of stops at 4.98 miles. It's kind of stopping. It's not returning any results for any coffee shops further than 5 miles from the user's location. Okay, so that's another way of doing a geolocation query. So the final type of geolocation query which you can run in Parse is something called a bounding box query. So again, let me copy and paste some code underneath. So I can do another type of query. And actually I'm just going to copy and paste some code above here. Okay, so to do a bounding box query, we want to find all coffee shops within a particular rectangular place. Now to do that, we need 2 geo points. If you imagine a rectangle, the southwest will be the bottom left-hand point, and the northeast would be the top right-hand point. So we're kind of defining 2 points that define a rectangular shape. Southwest is bottom left, and northeast is top right. So I've specified these already. They're kind of a shape of kind of just London really in its entirety, to be honest with you. And then instead of running within miles, we do a within geo box query. Again, the first parameter is the field on the place class, which has the geo point. And we don't really care about the user's location anymore. Now all we care about is we provide the first parameter is the southwest point, and the second parameter is a northeast point. It's very, very important you get these the right way round. So it's the bottom left, top right. That's the order of parameters which the within geobox function expects. And then again, everything else is exactly the same. We still get the distance, if you wanted to, from the user's current location here. But since this isn't really related to a user's location, it doesn't really matter in this use case. But I just left it there just so you can see. So again, click clear, hit run, and there you go. Now it's returning a bunch of coffee shops within that bounding box. Okay, so there you go. That's geolocation. It's deceptively simple in Parse. Generally, if you wanted to use geolocation in a bunch of other frameworks and databases, it can actually be a lot more complicated to set up. But with Parse, it makes it really, really, really simple, which is why Parse has been one of the main platforms used in kind of mobile development, because with mobile development, like geolocation and where the user is, it is really, really important. It's kind of a first-class feature, and it's kind of a first-class feature in Parse as well. So if you are kind of looking to build some geolocation features in your application, I really, really recommend Parse because it is this simple to implement it. Okay, cheers.